Good evening and welcome to the next installment in SAFE's Family Recovery webinar series. I'm AJ McCormick. I'm the Executive Assistant at SAFE and I'll be your moderator this evening. Tonight, we're joined by Jim Derick, SAFE's co-founder and Director of Family Recovery, to learn about healthy versus unhealthy family dynamics and how family recovery can support loved ones who are impacted by other substance use or mental health challenges. Following Jim's presentation, we'll open up discussion for Q&A. You'll see at the bottom of your screen, you have a little button for Q&A. Feel free to add questions there throughout the presentation, and then we'll save those for the last 15 minutes and then join discussion with Jim at that point. And at this point, I'll hand it over to Jim and we will begin his presentation.
Thank you, AJ, and welcome everybody to tonight's installment of a SAFE webinar series, which is designed to give everybody an opportunity to get some resources and education and information. I wanted to start out tonight just by, first of all, welcoming you, and then just establishing a couple of things that I think are important to give you some context about family recovery. First of all, I'll tell you about myself, just very briefly. I am a dad. That's how I came into this business. My lived experience is something that informs the way that we do family recovery here at SAFE. I had a son that was struggling with substance use disorder and some mental health challenges for well over 15 years. So I know firsthand what it's like to be in a family that is struggling with someone that they love that has these disorders. And I just want you to know that you're not alone. A cornerstone of what we do here at SAFE is to link lived experience, people that are struggling with other people that have similar lived experience. It is like magic what happens when you find people that understand the unique pressures you're up against. In this case, is a family that's coping with substance use disorder and or mental health concerns. The second thing I wanted to say is that during tonight, I am going to abbreviate. So we say substance use disorder and not addiction. So that is the abbreviation for that will be SUD, and mental health will be MH. I'm not that creative. Those are the two abbreviations that we have. And then finally, what we're going to do tonight is I'm really going to give an overview of what a healthy family looks like, what happens to a family oftentimes when substance use disorder and mental health challenges impact one of the family members. And the goal really tonight is to give some education around the fact that this is a family illness. When one person's impacted, the entire family becomes impacted. The whole dynamic in the family itself becomes impacted. And of course, individual family members are up against some unique challenges. So we'll talk a lot about that. So with that said, let us get into the presentation, and I will share my screen. And bear with me for a second. And that should be good. Okay, and that is my contact information here at SAFE Coalition.
Jim, we're not seeing your screen yet.
You're not seeing my screen, okay. All right, let's try it again. Sorry, guys. And
there we are.
From beginning. Great. Sorry about that. Rookie mistake. Excuse me. So you can see us now. So we are the SAFE Coalition. We're located in Franklin, Massachusetts, on 31 Hayward Street, and there is our contact information. We are a nonprofit. We have 4 divisions of care. I am the Director of Family Recovery, and we also have a division for collaborative care, a division for harm reduction, and an adolescent wellness division as well. I want to talk a little bit to start the conversation, just to kind of set the table. What does a family that has no presence of substance use disorder or mental health, what does a typical family look like? And of course, these are aspirational goals. I'm sure there are many families that hit a lot of these. A healthy family is one that supports the well-being, growth, and connection of all of its members. Starts with open and honest communication, family members feeling comfortable to express their thoughts, feelings, and concerns. Most families that are healthy and have a healthy family dynamic include mutual respect. Uh, Freely, we give each other emotional support. We learn how to show care, empathy, encouragement, and usually people feel safe turning to at least one or two other members in the family for comfort. There's a lot of trust and honesty in healthy families, and healthy families typically observe boundaries. So personal space, things like privacy and individuality are all encouraged and supported by fellow family members. In addition, there's shared responsibility in the household. Positive conflict resolution. Oftentimes, disagreements are handled calmly and constructively, focusing on solutions rather than blame. And of course, that's a moving target. I know it always was in my house, but that's the aspiration. Quality time together. Families often are looking to take shared vacations to help enhance their relationships. Uh, Families that are healthy are flexible and adaptable. They adjust to new changes easily, like new jobs, moves, or challenges, and actually get excited about those changes. And of course, every member is supported to pursue their own goals, learn new skills, and become independent. And that's what a family oftentimes can look like, many of those characteristics. So, what does happen when we introduce one family member presents with substance use disorder or a mental health concern? And I just want to pause 1 minute there. We know now, science knows that substance use disorder and mental health concerns are inextricably linked. They go together like hand in glove. In fact, many people are aware of the Nancy Reagan campaign, which was just say no to drugs. And we now know that the drugs aren't really the problem. It's the underlying thoughts, feelings, and emotions that people have that make them want to self-medicate that is the problem. And so mental health and substance use disorder are inextricably linked. So having said that, when one family member is dealing with addiction, the entire family system is affected. The patterns that are developed are not usually intentional. They tend to be ways for the family to try to cope with stress, fear, and uncertainty. And I think that's really important to highlight. These are not, when a family becomes unglued or experiences challenges in the presence of mental health and substance use disorder, the family isn't the problem. It's a natural reaction to stress that the family may suddenly face in the case of someone who suddenly becomes ill, or over time, maybe the family's been trying to find ways to treat this individual, and the individual's been resistant to change or to treatment. And so it's a cumulative effect of stress and strain in the family. But I really want to emphasize this is not a sign of a weak family. This is a normal response to very, very difficult and stressful situation. So what happens in the family? Well, for today's purposes, I'm going to use the example of parents with a child, an adult child that's suffering from substance use disorder and mental health. So let's say that I find out that my son is using and has been using for some time and may be addicted, and the family starts to have that realization together, and we are now working with a new uninvited visitor to our home, which is this new stressor. Oftentimes, what happens is communication breaks down. It becomes poor or strained, and becomes very. I liken it to walking on eggshells a lot, and everybody in the family feels that. I know that as a dad, I thought that I was the only one that felt the strain, but from reporting from my other sons who were not impacted by substance use or mental health concerns, they came to me after the fact and told me that they could feel that communication had broken down. In fact, they were afraid to come to me with a lot of things because they were afraid of upsetting the apple cart. Very, very, very common for communication to break down. Codependency, and we could do a whole webinar. In fact, we may do one on codependency, but I'll just mention it here. Codependency, if you're okay, I'm okay. What codependency really looks like in a household with substance use disorder is that as the person that's impacted goes through the roller coaster of their illness, we tend to, the healthy parents and possibly siblings, tend to go through that roller coaster with them. So when they're having a bad day or they're particularly impacted by their illness, we tend to go down into the basement with them. But when they're having a good day, we tend to feel a lot better. And it's a roller coaster ride that mirrors the disease process of substance use disorder and mental health and can be put in an intense strain on individuals within the household. So we'll talk a lot more about codependency either later or in a future webinar or both. Denial or minimization. This is something I'm very familiar with, having done it myself. And that's when you see a problem that may be indicative of addiction or mental illness in somebody that you love. The first reaction can be intense fear. And that fear can often, over time, be replaced with denial or minimization. And it may ebb and flow. Some days I'm denying and I'm minimizing, other days I'm frightened at what I'm seeing. And when that happens, it becomes very confusing for other members in the house that may be seeing it differently. Increased conflict or tension, we talked a little bit about that. It's related to communication as well. A lot of arguments, there can be emotional outbursts as this stressor in the house becomes kind of the dominant theme in the house. And people start to focus on that and the tension goes up significantly. So that happens. Enabling behaviors. I can't see the bottom of the screen, AJ. Maybe that's
We can see it fine, but yeah, if you want,
yeah.
might need to move your toolbar.
Yeah. So enabling is very much related to codependency. And I want sort of to draw an analogy here. With codependency, I'm only okay if you're okay. So it then follows, at least it did for me. And again, these are rules of thumb. It's not what every family experiences, but it certainly did with mine. That if I'm only okay if you're okay, then enabling becomes very attractive to me. And again, this is all subconsciously. So what does that look like? If I can give my loved one $100 and they are excited by that, then they're okay. And suddenly I feel better. And even though that $100 in the case of my son who was struggling with addiction would likely hurt him because it would then allow him to feed his illness, to go out and buy more drugs. So codependency and enabling behaviors kind of flip back and forth, but if you recognize any of this in you, then I would just be aware of that because it is a sign or a symptom that the family may need additional support and their own recovery journey. Okay. Oftentimes roles will shift in the family. So if you can imagine that someone in the family is usually assigned the role of the caretaker, and in my family, that was my wife. And my wife was there trying to fix everything. I was, I guess, the hero. I was overachieving. I was always looking to bring stability back to the family, kind of like the band playing while after the Titanic hits the iceberg. I'm the guy that's cheering everybody on, saying there's nothing to see here, everything's calm, when in reality, everybody was really hurting. There's can be the scapegoat, the lost child. Again, siblings are immensely impacted when one of their brothers or sisters or even a parent is struggling with substance misuse or mental health concerns. And those siblings or children of tend to get lost in this. And we really want to bring them out of the weeds and get them their support because it's extremely important that every member of the family gets support. Lack of trust. Oftentimes, introducing substance misuse and mental health issues into the family causes a lack of trust. Maybe I promised my loved ones that I would no longer enable my son, and yet they saw me hand him $50 in a moment of weakness for me, and I had promised not to. Or maybe there is secrecy around. Uh, Maybe my son promised to go to treatment on a Friday, and he didn't make it there, and I don't want to tell the rest of my family, so I hide that from them. So again, there are all kinds of dynamics. It doesn't mean that I'm a liar or I'm a bad person or the family's bad. It's just that these stressors are so intense, and the fear around this illness that you now have in your family, the fear that you might lose somebody is so intense that it causes these behaviors that really can fracture a family. Of course, we have emotional stress and anxiety, unclear or unhealthy boundaries. This is something that happens a lot. And that's as this person in the household continues to push back, as is often the case with these illnesses, push back on other loved ones. They're saying, you need to go to treatment, you need to get well, you need to get into recovery. The boundaries can start to become blurred. And we can start to rationalize things like dangerous behavior or allowing, loosening our what we know would be proper behavior to allow somebody to have a little bit more freedom, uh, even in the face of an obvious problem where they shouldn't have that type of freedom. And the rest of the family gets entirely confused. And then you can imagine other siblings are saying, well, what about us? How come you let Charlie do all of this, but you don't let us do it? And of course, I can speak as a parent. I was so afraid of losing my son to this illness that I was willing to allow him to do, at some points, almost anything he wanted to try to keep him happy. And it sounds crazy, and in a way it is. But again, we work with tons of families here, and I see these patterns repeat over and over and over. And then, of course, there's isolation. So back in 2016, when we formed the SAFE Coalition, one of our core missions was to reduce stigma. And I think, the world has made some real inroads to reducing stigma, but it's still there. And we still are not at the point where mental health and substance use disorder are mainstream diseases, meaning we talk about them like we would if our loved one had cancer or diabetes. And so that isolation can be suffocating for families, and I know that feeling. It's that feeling that I can't talk to anybody honestly about what's going on here because they won't understand, they won't like us anymore, and they'll think there's something wrong with us. And then finally, and this is particularly difficult for siblings and other people in the family. And if I'm a parent and I have a son or daughter that's impacted, the focus goes on to that person that has the disorder. And almost all of our time and energy is on that person and on the illness and trying to engineer ways to fix them. And I will tell you that that is a terrible thing to have happen to a family. I remember losing family vacations. Just I'd be away in Florida with my entire family, and I would lose a week mentally. I wouldn't even remember playing football with my son on the beach or some of the things we did because I was so focused on what was going on with my son that was impacted. Um, I think it's really important, as I keep repeating, that these patterns are responses to a very difficult situation, and they're not failures. So what we want to talk about next are the supports, or what can happen with support, and what does it mean to be a family in recovery. I'm sorry, I jumped the gun. Let me talk one more minute about whoops. the impact of substance use disorder and mental illness on the family a little bit more, because these are important points. And again, we see literally hundreds of families since for the last 10 years. And these patterns are very predictable and very persistent and very common in families that are in this situation. First is blame. We tend to, as parents, blame ourselves for our loved one's illness. It's probably the number one thing I hear is, what did I do wrong? Initially when people come in, what did we do wrong? We must have missed something. We must have done something wrong. And with time, I often also hear that from siblings, brothers and sisters, who say, I wonder if we caused this. And of course, we know a critical principle for family recovery is that you didn't cause it, you can't control it, and you can't cure it. But again, that's a very persistent emotion. Secondly, that goes right along with that, if I caused it, then I'm responsible to fix my loved one. This is asking someone to do the impossible. And I was that guy who felt it was my responsibility to fix my son. I want you to imagine if, God forbid, your loved one had cancer or diabetes. Is there any universe that any of us would say, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to keep my loved one at home and I'll treat them for their cancer. I'll treat them for their diabetes. It's my responsibility. Of course not. They go into JDRF or they go into the Dana-Farber Cancer system and they get treatment. But with substance use disorder and often with mental health, one of the key differences is that the person that's been impacted often doesn't either A, think they have a problem, or B, they don't want treatment. They feel like they can fix it themselves. So we see this resistance to care, which tends to double down on the rest of the family, thinking that it's their responsibility to fix them. And the reality is, it's preposterous. We can't do that. We don't have that ability. Thirdly, we see, of course, a lot of emotional strain. I keep coming back to this because we know that substance use disorder can kill. We know that drugs can kill. We know that alcohol use can kill. I want to say from firsthand experience that the emotional strain that accompanies being a family member of someone that's suffering could kill us. It's that bad. So it's really important to get support and to get help. Same with chronic stress. I talked earlier about breakdown of trust. Financial problems certainly can exist. I know that oftentimes insurance doesn't cover fully, or maybe not at all, some of the treatment that's needed for these conditions. And as a result, financial problems can come up, only adding fuel to the fire of the intense emotions that are being experienced in the family. And we talked about communication issues. Of course, we talked about conflict and instability. I do want to talk a little bit about a loss of safety. Excuse me. And I do mean both emotional safety as well as physical safety in the household. When we have somebody who's struggling with these conditions, often those conditions are accompanied by volatile behavior, by police visits, by emergency room visits, and this can cause this incredible sense that the home is no longer the safe and quiet place. The sense that almost anything could happen at any moment, and a fear that something terrible is going to happen. And so there's always that sense that a shoe is going to drop. And that unpredictability of stability in the home really has an impact on everybody. I think we can all imagine what it would feel like to be a child in that type of a home. And I can speak as a parent. It was frightening, and I lost my peace of mind as a result. We talked about impact on children. Resentment and exhaustion. Certainly, we can start resenting the people that we love because of this long haul that we've been on, trying to fight this battle, in this case, for our loved one. And it gets awfully tiring. And we talked about enabling and boundaries. Oh, I'm trouble with that. No, why is that not working? Why is it not working? Oh. All right, guys, there we go. I do want to talk a little bit more about cycles of hope and disappointment. This is an area that I was familiar with. Most people that have been through this are. And what I mean by that is that, I'll just speak off the top of my head and candidly, the first trip that my son took to rehab, he went in for a period of 90 days in Florida. I remember coming home and thinking, that's it, we're all set. And the entire family was celebrating because I assumed that meant that he was all done, that he had his treatment, he'd be all set. It sounds ridiculous now with what I know about these illnesses, but of course he came home and he enjoyed a period of recovery and then relapsed, and that can be part of this cycle. But as a family member, you can imagine, especially a family member that wasn't educated on addiction, that didn't understand mental health. I had no understanding. I hadn't been educated. I didn't even see that as something that was helpful to me. I was just going to fix this myself. And so you can imagine the roller coaster of disappointment when those relapses occur. And disappointment's putting lipstick on it. It actually was devastating. It would be devastating. And those relapses and treatment and relapses and treatment, in my son's case, happened over 11 times. And so it can be, it's a long, long haul. Long-term relationship damage, that will happen. That without intervention, the patterns that are established in the family that we've just spoken about, these patterns of being that are so toxic and disruptive to the family, those can persist and go on even though our loved one gets well. So in the case of somebody that successfully enters recovery for their addiction, if the family isn't treated, that family can go on with their sick patterns in a very, very unhealthy way. And I hit on the rest of those. And finally, role disruption. Family members, as I mentioned before, they can take on unhealthy roles. We can parentify kids in this process and make them caretakers or fixers. You could have children going out and buying things like cigarettes for the loved one that's been impacted. We get very confused, and the proper lanes and roles get muddied and messed up during this process. We can neglect our other relationships, and studies have shown that families that do not receive support, do not enter their own recovery, have a 33% increase risk of a mental health concern like anxiety and depression. And I should also add a 33% increase in their own developing their own substance use disorder as they struggle to cope with these very, very challenging dynamics. So this is kind of a review. We talked a lot about this. The beginning, we say we might have a problem, okay? And you're just starting to understand that maybe there's something going on here. Maybe one person in the family sees it and the other people are arguing, saying, no, I don't think it's that bad. That causes a ton of anxiety. I mentioned rationalizing and minimizing. That's a very common trait. It's not that bad. It can't be that bad. Let's see how it looks tomorrow. I think we're overreacting. That's very, very common. Increased suspicion, that again, you're watching your loved one come in. We're not addiction professionals, but we're looking at their eyes, we're looking at their behavior, and we're trying to decide whether or not they're under the influence. There's a whole ton of a lack of trust going on there, and everyone in the family can feel and sense that. Oftentimes, a crisis or a series of crises leads to acknowledging that the problem is serious. So in my case, it was an overdose, and we said, "My gosh, this is not. We've now graduated to the big leagues." That big crisis leads to, of course, an enormous emotional impact. Again, we are drawn to this notion that we can fix it, and I can't state this enough. We attempt to control and fix these illnesses on our own, and it is the most frustrating. This literally brought me to my knees. I could not fix or control my son, and I felt that I was a failure. And of course, now that I've gotten support and my family's in recovery itself, we know that it never was my job. My only job was to love him, not to fix him. But while I was sick and while I was doing this, it was overwhelming to me to walk around thinking that I was failing. And then again, these cycles often repeat. It's a roller coaster ride when you're dealing with somebody in the family uh, that has substance use disorder, and they're coming in and out of recovery. They're coming in and out of moments where you think it's not as bad, and maybe it's bad, and then there's a crisis, and so the cycles often repeat and repeat and repeat. So I've just highlighted all of the bad. So what's the good news here? Well, the good news is that families with support can enter their own recovery, so that while their loved one is hopefully pursuing their path of recovery, a family can actually get on a parallel track and get into their own recovery. In fact, I think it's essential that families do that. And I also want to just point out that the irony was lost on me at the time, but it now really sits with me. And the irony was this: that when my son was struggling, the number one thing that I wanted him to do was to get into treatment, ask for help, go to appointments, stay with it. Don't give up. For the long run, this is a lifelong treatment, whether it's AA meetings or therapy or whatever his choice of recovery was. I knew that he had to do it every week and that it was a process. But yet when it came to my own family, I didn't see it that way because I wasn't educated. I didn't see that I had a need to get my family into its own recovery and that it was essential. And the truth is, it was. And so I find it ironic that we were asking him to do something that I wasn't willing to do myself. And so I just find it to be so courageous of families that walk through these doors to get into their own recovery, knowing that it's essential for the long-term good of the family. So what does family recovery mean? First, it means shifting from reacting to a crisis to stability. That's the aspirational goal. So rather than whistle our way through the day and then react to a crisis, can we do things to prepare, knowing that this illness exists in our family? Can we do things now to prepare so that if and when the inevitable does happen, that something comes up that's urgent, we will already have our footing to be able to work with our loved one in a calm and efficient manner. Secondly, family recovery means deepening our understanding of substance use disorder and mental health illness as illnesses through education. I can't emphasize this enough. There's a lot of things I talk about what we can't do. It's impossible for me to create the willingness in a loved one to make them want to get better. So I can't fix them. But what I can do is get us educated. Thirdly, we can learn as a family how to set and maintain healthy boundaries. That is critical. Fourth, we can identify and stop enabling behaviors. Fifth, we can recognize uh, and heal from a lot of these emotional impacts. Fourthly, we can support and not control our loved ones' recovery. Oop, oop, I messed up. Sorry about that. So support and control our loved one. I'm sorry, support and not control our loved one's recovery. And there's a lot of ways to do that. So, what are some of the key action steps? What are the things that we can do as a family to get into that recovery? Well, first of all, it's acknowledging the problem. Just like the alcoholic or the person with substance use disorder has to acknowledge their problem, and that's step one, it's surrender to the problem. We need to acknowledge the problem and openly recognize that this has had an impact on the family and stop denying or minimizing the problem. Secondly, it's really important for us to find professional and peer support, and I do put them together. So things like therapy or coming here at SAFE, we have peer support where we meet with people one on one and share our lived experience, not because we have all the answers, but because we've walked the walk before and we know what it feels like to be on the other side of the table. And certainly we can find support through support groups like Families Anonymous, which we have here every Tuesday night. We can support, as I mentioned before, and not control the individual. And obviously, we can get education. We can heal emotionally. We can rebuild trust. We can care for each family member, even while the loved one is struggling. We can change our focus to make sure that everybody's receiving the care that they need and they deserve. And we certainly can work on improving our communication. I want to emphasize that family recovery does not mean everything becomes perfect. You know, these goals are all aspirational, but it does mean healthier relationships. It does mean clearer boundaries. It does mean hopefully reduced conflict. It means greater emotional stability. And it certainly means a sense of hope and a sense of resilience. And those are things that are absent in a family that is not in recovery, and they're indispensable when your family is in recovery. And it's palpable and everyone can feel it. And I really want to drive this point home as well. And this is not a reason to get into family recovery, but it is a wonderful benefit. Studies show that families in recovery significantly increase the rates of recovery and success for the individual in your family that has substance use disorder or mental health challenges. To put it bluntly, if my family is still sick, back on the yellow slides, they've never healed, they've never gone through any process for family recovery. And my son comes back to that after being away for, say, 6 months for treatment. He comes into a chaotic home that have trust issues and the boundaries aren't existing and people are fighting and the stress is off the charts. And when he gets home, we all start staring at him and seeing whether or not he's sober and trying to control him. And we literally undercut the principles that he learned of recovery, which center on the individual taking responsibility for their own recovery, the individual taking responsibility, not the family. So I think you might be able to see how the family in recovery really supports your loved one coming back when they're in recovery. So I like to call this from fear to faith, and that's my own editorial there. It's how I describe our family's journey in recovery. You know, everything we did was reacting to fear when we weren't well. Everything we did, we lived our lives reacting to fear. And that creates a reactive, not a proactive environment. It creates a sense of doom and dread, a sense of unpredictability, it's the opposite of stability. So, how do we move from fear to faith? Well, we learn, first of all, that we can't control the willingness of the person that's been impacted to get well. We can put all the resources we want in front of people. We can beg and ask them to go to treatment. But if they're not willing to get well, they're not going to get well. So we need, when we realize this and really embody this, that we cannot control this person's willingness, we then turn to looking at that individual with love and tell them, you can do this. And we start to encourage them. We no longer are burdened by our failure to control it. Instead, we're focused on supporting and encouraging our loved one. Secondly, moving from fear to faith means we recognize that these are illnesses and not a choice. Not only are we not to blame for the illness, but our loved one, who oftentimes has behaviors that are disturbing to us, we learn that those behaviors are manifestations of the illness, not character flaws. So we learn to empathize. Thirdly, we firmly know that our needs matter as much as our loved ones' needs matter. And this is what I call the anecdote or the Alka-Seltzer for codependency. We count, our needs count, our lives count. How can we bring peace and a sense of stability in a sense that each one of our individuals' lives count equally back to the home that has been spotlighting this individual for so long? And the way we do that is through support. Families Anonymous, a wonderful 12-step support group that we run here every Tuesday night, peer support, therapy, getting clinical care, and what I call finding your tribe. And I'll bet you understand it's when you find other people with similar lived experience and you've been going through something like this, it is indispensable, and you tend to make relationships that you'll have for the rest of your life because you don't have to explain to them the nuances of what's been happening. They already know. We establish good boundaries. That's what from fear to faith means, good boundaries. Enabling behaviors are identified and eliminated. And I call it the reasonable person standard. Sometimes I was doing things for a 30-year-old that I wouldn't have done for my 12-year-old. I would have asked them to do it themselves, but I was so afraid of saying no that I continued to do something for them, and it wasn't reasonable. From fear to faith, we focus on what we can control. So we can educate ourselves. We can encourage our loved one. We can learn about resources and share them within the family. And importantly, we can express to our loved one the one thing that we have to give them, which is unconditional love. And I could go on and on about that, but I will tell you that when our family got into recovery, I was finally able to look at my son and love him the way he was that day, not the way I'd hope he'd be someday if he was in recovery, and not the way that I wished that he had been back when he was a little kid, but I could actually tell him the truth, which is that I loved him right now. And I wasn't trying to strangle him to get him into treatment. I just loved him. And I did want to point out that when we're moving from fear to faith, we recognize that the two recovery journeys can run independently and on parallel tracks. But that doesn't mean our loved one is going to stay on that track. And the message that I have for families is your track is independent. You stay on your track. It's a long haul. Continue with the support, regardless of what happens with your loved one. Just keep coming, keep getting your support. It's critical. And peace among chaos, and that is the ultimate payoff. When we can start to feel a sense of peace, a sense that everything will be okay, a sense that, yeah, that we're okay, even though the stimulus that around us is stimulus that used to send us into mind-numbing fear and into mind-numbing depression spirals. When we go through recovery, we can find peace, even though things aren't perfect with our loved one. And again, I don't mean to say that it's just some utopia and you never have a worry again, but it is manageable. It is attainable. We can find peace in the middle of this. And I am not going to go into the codependency. I can see the time we will be doing a another webinar on both codependency and boundary setting at a future date. So I did want to talk more about family recovery resources. I mentioned before, we have support groups here at the Safe Coalition. We have Families Anonymous. It's a 12-step. Think Al-Anon. It's much like Al-Anon, but it has casts a very broad net and includes both substance use disorder and mental health. So it's very broad. So Families Anonymous meets up here every Tuesday evening, 6:30 to 8, and we also have a virtual option. We have the Ripple Effect, which is a sibling support group that's on Zoom every Monday evening. We have Grandparents Raising Grandchildren, another group that meets at the YMCA. And there's a group, Learn to Cope, which I was a member of and a facilitator for years. That's another style of support. We have peer support here at SAFE, where you can walk in. Actually, I'll do a quick plug for Friday mornings from 8:30 to noon. No appointment necessary. You can come in and just sit and have a cup of coffee and maybe for the first time take a deep breath and talk about some of these issues. And we are here to do that with you. We have clinical support here. You can certainly find therapy is helpful. And of course, education and resources. So I hope this was helpful. And as always, I want the big takeaway here is you are not alone. If you are a family that is struggling with this, as I did at one time, please know that you can call us anytime. My number and my email contact are on the screen now. And with that, I will turn it back to AJ.
All right. So we will open it up for Q&A. We're also joined by Michaela Weinstein, one of our family recovery clinicians, also works with adolescent wellness. If you pop in for Safe Cafe, you might meet with her one Friday. And let me make sure I have all of us on screen there. Okay, so we will open it up for Q&A. Again, you have a Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. You can submit questions there and we'll discuss them together. You can also use the chat feature to send questions if that's easier. So let's get started with one. What do you think the most common mistake is that you see for families when they first try to set boundaries?
The most common, pardon me?
Mistake.
Mistake. When they
Maybe
first try to,
misstep.
yeah, when the first misstep. Well, I think probably the first misstep would be consequence, moving the line in the sand. And it's something that I did a lot. So a boundary is only as good as your willingness to follow through with whatever the boundary is that you set up. And, I used to think that I could slide that boundary a little bit if it was inconvenient to enforce in the moment, and that I could come back to it another time. But every time I slid that boundary, the boundary got bigger and bigger and bigger. It just expanded. So I see that as one common mistake that, as I mentioned, I'm familiar with because I did it.
So adding to that, when your loved one is in crisis, and so maybe they're unhoused or they're in danger in some way, and so you have that fear also guiding you or encouraging you not to keep that boundary. How do you advise a loved one to manage that situation when they are faced with that fear?
Well, I think importantly, like you mean when there's a crisis and a boundary is then jeopardized because of the crisis? Yeah.
Or like if I don't break my boundary, this person may die. Like that kind of fear that you're carrying with you. I have to break it, or
Yeah.
it'll. Yeah.
That's such a great question. And really, there's no magic bullet to get through that fear. But I will tell you, one of the things the 12 steps does is it gives us a roadmap. It gives us guardrails on a road and gives us a way to receive our support. So anyone that's been through Al-Anon or Families Anonymous would understand what I'm saying, but it gives you a roadmap so that when you feel this way, you can reach out for support that way. And there's a whole litany of material behind that to support you. So I think the best way to manage that is to get into a support group as soon as you possibly can And importantly, keep coming to that support group. You may go to one meeting and maybe it doesn't hit you right away as to why this might be important. So I'd give it 6 months before I made a decision on any one support group.
Um, I think also too, if I can just add to that, AJ, kind of from the potentially from the young adult standpoint or side of things, a frequent conversation that we have in diversion is like my loved ones are coming at me from a space of fear with my substance use and they want me to stop using. So because they're nervous for the consequences of me, and that sort of comes to fruition in like many different ways, how that translates to the young person. But 100% of the time it's not effective for them and the way that they receive it. So they understand that it's coming from love, like the fear and wanting them to stop using substances is coming from a place of love, but it almost never makes them stop doing what they're doing. So if like parents or loved ones can take, I guess, solace in the fact that if they're not acting on that fear, it's not do or die because it's not necessarily the decision making factor for that person who is engaging in substance use.
And maybe a good point to touch on here. Could you say a little about how emotions like fear can cloud your judgment and cause you to not make the most rational decision at that time?
It's a great question. So I'll give you an example that actually happened to me. My and it was very difficult to tie it back to fear at the time. So my son wanted me to repair a tire on his vehicle, and so he found a way to tell me that he needed it and desperately needed this tire. That's all he had to say. And if it had been any other one of my other sons, I would have said, "I don't have the money right now, and I don't have the time. Do it yourself." But instead, the fear impacted me. I said, I better get this done right away. Oh my gosh, it's for him. I ran out, took money that I didn't have, purchased the tire, went over, had the tire installed for him. It was the same day. It was within about an hour of him requesting it. And as it turns out, he really didn't need the tire fixed that quickly. And it was my fear that was running the day. But I had to peel that onion a little bit and think really hard, what is being touched in me right now? And that's the question I urge people to ask around fear. If you can slow the game down a little bit when you're in those conversations and say, what's being touched in me? And if it's fear, maybe take a pause and think about it. And if you're in a group like Families Anonymous or you're getting peer support, you can call one of your peers and bounce it off of them. And that's a wonderful strategy for getting some clarity on maybe what the next step is.
So, kind of going to the other side of the spectrum with boundaries, we talk about, I think a lot of times we hear about boundaries being too flexible, but you mentioned boundaries can also be too rigid, like completely cutting off communication with someone. Could you say just a little more about that and how that also hurts the family dynamic?
Yeah, I think that rigidness is a difficult, when they're too rigid. And again, there's a few things I want to say about this. So when you're setting boundaries, and if your instinct is to be extremely rigid with them, then I would suggest that you think about whether or not you're trying to control your loved one's illness. It's a sign of codependency. It's a sign of um, possibly being wrapped up in that thought that you can fix them. So that's the first thing. So, but when you're setting boundaries, if they're too rigid and detailed, then you really are boxing yourself into your own corner because they may be impossible to enforce. And so we really want to talk about, I think, boundaries more in the way of themes as opposed to rules. You know, I have a right to my privacy. I expect nobody to go in my bedroom. That would be a theme, as opposed to do not go in the room. If you do, you lose your privileges for your automobile. You can't vape anymore, and you can't go on vacation. That's too rigid. It's a system designed to fail. So I would be looking more at broader themes about, again, what a healthy family looks like and what are healthy boundaries.
I think Also, too, I don't want to interrupt Jim if you had other things you wanted to touch on, but I think that is such a great point with themes too, because we know that everyone is different and every situation is different. And Jim and I have had this conversation numerous times that it is essentially setting yourself up for failure if you sort of set the standard for this is exactly what's going to happen if X happens, no matter what across the board, because there's always those outlying factors or external things or internal things going on that make each and every situation different. So if you have that one end all be all answer, it's just again setting yourself up for failure for that kind of approach.
It's very helpful. So shifting gears just a little bit, it can be very scary for someone to seek out help, especially thinking about going into a support group for the first time. You don't know the people there, you don't know what it's going to be like. Can you say a little bit about what people can expect when they go to something like Families Anonymous for the first time? What the atmosphere is like?
What a great question. Um, let me just acknowledge just that. This is a hard walk coming up the stairs to SAFE or anywhere else that you get support for the first time. It's really hard, and we know that. And we have taken, Jen and all of our team have taken great care in creating a home-like environment here. So the first thing you're going to be is the environment is cozy and warm. Secondly, the people, everybody there has been you at one point, and they're keenly aware of it. So our members of the group, whether they've been coming to one session or have been, some of them been with us for 7 or 8 years, uh, they are looking for newcomers, extremely sensitive to how the newcomer may be feeling. And the important thing that I want you to know is everybody knows you may not want to share. You may not want to talk. We have a lot of newcomers come in and they don't talk for 5 to 10 meetings. That's okay. No one's going to ask you to talk. No one's going to ask you to share unless you want to. It is going to be the warmest hug you've ever gotten from people that really get what you're going through. And it literally, the 12 steps in Families Anonymous saved my life. I don't say that lightly. So please do come and join us. And if you want more information or you just want to chat a little bit about the meetings, you can always call me or email me.
I think too, what Jim mentioned in the PowerPoint presentation is Safe Cafe is also a really great way to sort of get your entrance into that realm. It's very low stakes, super welcoming environment. You can just come in, have a cup of coffee, see the space before you actually attend a meeting, hear a little bit more information about all of the different programs. And just sort of ease yourself into it that way. If you don't want to come alone, you could always bring a support person or a loved one or a friend that would maybe make the whole experience more relaxing for you. We love having visitors, so Safe
Mm.
Cafe might also be a good step into that world.
And I will add too that our tagline at Safe is "You're not alone." And I think coming to this group or any type of support is going to help you see that. And part of it's just understanding that like your situations, it might be special in its own way. It's not unique though. And so like realizing that there's not something wrong with you or your family, that it's just how these things happen. And so you learn, and it's like an epiphany once you have that moment of like this is actually normal, and I thought something was wrong with me.
Exactly right. And I also want to say that if someone doesn't want to go to a support group, there are some people that don't want to be in groups. Please come in for peer support. So, what is peer support? We set up a regular support meeting, usually meet once every 2 weeks. There's resources, and I don't want to call it homework, but there are exercises that we do together. So, there's a lot of things that peers can do together or clinical support. So, it doesn't have to be support groups in order to heal.
Even like educational resources for the more introverted person, like that's still it, maybe it's not a group setting, maybe that one-on-one or the stuff that homework that gives you the support you need.
Exactly.
Okay, we have time for one more question. I think you talked about the healthy family dynamics, but I want to ask, what are some of the early signs of a family that is starting to heal? So what can people look forward to as they enter this family recovery healing process, and what can they start
Yeah, that's
seeing?
a great question. I think the first sign or symptom is when you yourself start to exhale a little bit and you can feel that relaxation. You stop, your posture goes from this to sort of a relaxation. The second thing would be a realization that the same stimulus that you've been getting, you're now reacting to differently. So that's a wonderful sign that a family's entering recovery because they start to react differently. I think another symptom of entering family recovery is when the obsession of the mind, in other words, that obsession that I have to fix this person, and that's all you think about 24/7. And that was me for 15 years. When that obsession of the mind starts to relax, and what you're left with again is unconditional love for that person and support, but you're not carrying that backpack with rocks in it that don't belong to you. And those backpack and rocks are your responsibility to fix them. And then I think you will see family members start to enter into healthy conversations and back to that sort of mutual respect and trust and healthy boundaries. So it's really palpable when it happens. It's I never have a family say, "Oh, we didn't realize we were doing better." It's usually, "Holy smokes, this actually works," you know. And that begs the question: how long does it take to achieve support? You'll see results really very, very quickly. The first month or two, you're going to start seeing results, and the longer you're committed to it, the better things get. I promise. It's just great. So thanks, AJ, for that question. That was a good one.
All right, so we are at time. Michaela, Jim, any final thoughts, comments before we sign off? And
Just thank you so much for coming. And I think our website is always a great place to keep an eye on and look at if you're interested in coming in, services, seeing future or former webinars. It's just our website is great. So check that out.
And I would just remind people you're not alone, and we're eager to have you up and meet with you. So call or email anytime.
all right, well, thank you, everyone, and have a wonderful evening. And we hope to see you at Safe Cafe bright and early tomorrow morning. Take care.